Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into something pretty big today, a topic that's honestly making headlines and could actually impact all of us. It's those escalating trade tensions you keep hearing about between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. We got some recent analysis here, and let me tell you, things are getting kind of heated.
Yeah, it's fascinating because this isn't just some random trade spat.
Right.
These three countries, they've got this long history of close economic ties. They even share a trade agreement. You might remember NAFTA.
Oh, yeah?
Well, NAFTA, it kind of evolved into the USMCA, which was supposed to modernize and strengthen those relationships. But now, it seems like all that goodwill has just gone out the window.
So remind me, what's exactly going on here?
Well, on February 1st, 2025, the Trump administration dropped a bombshell, a 25% tariff on almost all imports from both Canada and Mexico.
Wow.
And if that wasn't enough, Canadian oil and energy exports, they got hit with an extra 10% on top of that.
Wow, a 25% tariff? That's a pretty hefty increase. What was the reasoning behind such a drastic move?
Well, the Trump administration, they pointed to three main things.
Okay.
Trade imbalances, illegal immigration, and drug trafficking.
Okay.
Specifically, the flow of fentanyl into the U.S.
Right.
Their argument was that Canada and Mexico weren't playing fair on trade. They were contributing to the illegal immigration problem and fooling the drug crisis.
I see the argument about trade imbalances. I mean, countries often try to protect their own industries, right? But tying immigration and drug trafficking to tariffs, that seems a bit stretched, doesn't it?
Yeah, it certainly raises some eyebrows.
Yeah.
Immigration and drug trafficking are very complex issues, and linking them directly to tariffs, it kind of suggests maybe a strategy of using economic pressure to achieve other geopolitical goals.
Interesting. So maybe not as straightforward as it seems on the surface.
Right.
What was the reaction from Canada and Mexico? They didn't just roll over, did they?
Not at all. Both countries, they retaliated swiftly and strategically, hitting back with carefully targeted counter tariffs of their own.
Okay, give me the rundown. What sectors did they go after?
Well, Canada, they focused on industries that would directly impact American businesses and consumers.
Oh, wow.
They slapped a 25% tariff on things like American agricultural goods, so dairy, beef, grains.
Ooh.
Picture your weekly grocery bill suddenly getting a lot more expensive.
Yeah.
And they also hit automobiles and parts.
Right.
Which could disrupt a major U.S. industry.
Ouch, that's got to sting. So hitting where it hurts, right? What about Mexico's response?
Mexico, they were a bit more creative.
Okay.
They also imposed tariffs, mainly targeting American agricultural exports, but they got strategic with non-tariff barriers, too.
Okay.
Think things like intentionally delaying import permits for U.S. goods.
Right.
Making it harder and slower for American businesses to get their products into Mexico. They even hinted at potential legal action through the USMCA's dispute resolution mechanisms.
So a mix of economic jabs and legal maneuvering. It sounds like things escalated pretty quickly.
They did.
But I thought I heard something about a truce. Did they manage to cool things down a bit?
Yeah. After some intense back and forth, they agreed to a 30-day delay.
Okay.
Before the full force of the tariffs kicked in. A temporary sigh of relief, but it came with conditions.
There's always a catch, isn't there? What did Canada and Mexico have to agree to?
They pledged to ramp up border security efforts and crack down on drug trafficking, which seemed to be a major sticking point for the U.S.
Okay.
However, they stood firm on one crucial point: no renegotiating the USMCA. They basically said, we have a deal, let's stick to it.
So a temporary ceasefire, but the underlying tensions are still simmering. This 30-day delay just postpones the inevitable, right? What happens next?
Well, the clock is ticking. The deadline for a more permanent resolution is March 4th, 2025.
Yeah.
That's just around the corner. It's a nail-biter. Will they strike a last-minute deal, or will this trade war explode?
Okay, so we've got this high-stakes standoff. But let's get real. What does this all mean for everyday people? What are the actual consequences of these tariffs for the countries involved and for the global economy? I mean, this can't be good, right?
That's where it gets really interesting and potentially worrisome. This situation, it goes way beyond just numbers on a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
We're talking about potential economic and political fallout that could impact all of us.
All right, let's break it down, starting with the U.S. What's the potential damage?
Well, for starters, get ready for higher prices on a whole range of goods.
Yeah.
Imported from Canada and Mexico. We already talked about those grocery bills going up, but think about cars, appliances, electronics,
Right.
anything that uses parts or materials from our neighbors.
Right.
These supply chains, they're deeply intertwined, so disruptions will ripple across various sectors.
So basically, get ready to feel the pinch in your wallet.
Yeah,
Inflation, here we come.
that's a real concern. And it's not just consumers. American businesses, especially those reliant on North American trade, they're facing a tidal wave of uncertainty.
Yeah.
Will they be able to get the supplies they need? Will their costs go through the roof? Will they be forced to move their operations? These are tough questions with no easy answers.
It sounds like a recipe for economic instability. And what about Canada and Mexico? How are they bracing for impact?
For them, the biggest worry is a potential slowdown in their export-driven industries.
Right.
A huge chunk of their economies relies on trade with the U.S., so these tariffs, they create a massive roadblock.
Right.
We could see job losses, especially in manufacturing and agriculture,
Right.
and increased pressure on domestic producers, who are now facing tougher competition from other global markets.
So they're getting hit with a double whammy, hurt by the tariffs, and facing tougher competition from elsewhere. What are they doing to navigate this economic storm?
Well, one interesting development is that both countries, they're actively looking for ways to lessen their dependence on U.S. trade.
Okay.
They're exploring stronger ties with other global players like Europe and Asia, basically seeking alternative markets for their products. It's like they're being forced to diversify their economic portfolios.
That makes sense. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, right? But what does all this mean for the bigger picture? For the global economy as a whole? Is this just a regional spat, or could it have wider implications?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? We need to remember that global markets, they're all interconnected. What happens in North America doesn't stay in North America. These trade tensions, they're already sending shockwaves through the global economy, creating uncertainty and volatility in financial markets.
Right.
And if things escalate further, well, it could trigger a domino effect, impacting other economies and industries far beyond our borders.
It sounds like we're teetering on the edge of a global economic earthquake.
Yeah.
But hold on, let's take a breather for a second. We've covered a lot of ground here. Maybe we can recap the key takeaways before we dive into the even deeper implications of this trade war.
Absolutely. Here's the situation in a nutshell. The U.S., under the Trump administration, launched a trade war by imposing tariffs on Canada and Mexico. Citing concerns about trade imbalances, immigration, and drug trafficking, Canada and Mexico quickly retaliated with tariffs targeting key U.S. industries.
And now we're in a temporary truce, a 30-day timeout, with a looming deadline of March 4th. But both sides are digging in their heels, and the potential consequences, both economic and political, are enormous.
Exactly. It's a high-stakes game of chicken, with no clear winner in sight.
This is definitely a lot to process. We've laid the groundwork, but there's so much more to uncover. Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll explore the potential long-term ramifications of this conflict and delve into the broader geopolitical forces at play. Trust me, things are about to get even more interesting. Okay, so we just talked about this trade war heating up between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. But zooming out a bit, it feels like this situation forces us to think about the future of global trade as a whole, you know?
It does. For decades, we've seen this push toward globalization, breaking down barriers, encouraging free trade.
Right.
But lately, it seems like the pendulum is swinging back the other way.
Yeah.
With countries getting more protectionist.
Right.
Putting their own interests first. The situation with the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. It's a prime example in international trade.
Right.
They set the rules,
Yeah.
offer ways to resolve disputes, and ideally prevent things from spiraling out of control.
But even with the USMCA in place, we're still on the verge of a major trade war.
Yeah.
So what's the point of these agreements if countries can just ignore them or threaten to pull out whenever it suits them?
You're hitting on a crucial point. These agreements, they're only as strong as the country's commitment to them. And when trust breaks down and national interests clash, the whole system is at risk.
So are we witnessing the beginning of the end for globalization? Are we headed towards a future of fragmented markets, trade wars, and every country for itself?
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
While the current trend is concerning, history shows us that there's this constant ebb and flow
Okay.
between periods of greater global integration and periods of countries pulling back. We might be in a readjustment phase where countries are rethinking their trade relationships, trying to find a new balance between looking out for themselves and cooperating globally.
So maybe a recalibration. Could this be a wake-up call to fix some of the problems that have come with globalization and create a system that's more sustainable and fair for everyone?
That's one way to look at it. This could be an opportunity to rethink the rules of global trade, make sure the benefits are more evenly spread,
Right.
and address concerns about things like environmental sustainability and labor standards.
Like we need a globalization 2.0, a system that's more inclusive, responsive to everyone's needs, and better equipped to deal with the challenges of a rapidly changing world.
I think that's a great way to put it. Globalization isn't going away, but it's likely to evolve, maybe in ways we can't even fully predict yet.
Okay, stepping back from the big picture for a second, we've talked about the potential economic and political consequences. But what about the impact on people's lives? What's the human cost of this trade war?
That's an essential part of the story that we can't ignore. These trade tensions, they have very real consequences for individuals, families, and entire communities.
Let's paint a picture for our listeners. Imagine you're a farmer in the Midwest, and you rely on exporting soybeans to Mexico. Suddenly, your biggest market disappears because of tariffs.
All right.
And you're struggling to keep your farm afloat. Or imagine you're an auto worker in Ontario whose factory has to lay off workers because they can't get the parts they need due to disruptions in the supply chain.
Those are just two examples among many. We could talk about small business owners struggling to stay open because their costs have skyrocketed.
Right.
Or families forced to make tough choices because their income has shrunk. The human cost of this trade war, it's measured in lost jobs, financial hardship, and uncertainty about the future.
It's tough to think about the ripple effects of these decisions made by governments. It's not just about the money. It's about social stability, communities falling apart, and people losing faith in the system.
Exactly. When people feel like the rug has been pulled out from under them, it breeds anger, mistrust.
Yeah.
And it divides us. These feelings can have consequences that last far longer than the economic downturn.
It's like this trade war is also a social experiment, testing how strong are the political maneuvering and the human cost of this trade war. But I'm curious about the things we might not be thinking about. Are there any unexpected ripple effects that could surprise us?
That's where it gets even more interesting. One area to keep an eye on is the impact on innovation and technological advancement.
Really? I wouldn't have thought of that. How are they connected?
Well, in today's globalized world, a lot of innovation comes from collaboration.
Right.
Think of companies and researchers from different countries working together to push the boundaries of what's possible.
Right. It's like a worldwide brain trust.
Exactly. But when you start putting up trade barriers, creating an atmosphere of suspicion, it blocks that free flow of ideas and knowledge.
Right.
Companies might hesitate to share their intellectual property.
Right.
Researchers might be restricted from working with colleagues in other countries, and the overall pace of innovation could slow down.
So we could be stifling human ingenuity just when we need it most to tackle problems like climate change, diseases, and resource scarcity.
Precisely. That's a hidden cost that might not be immediately obvious, but it could have a significant impact on our future.
It's like shooting ourselves in the foot, trying to protect ourselves in the short term, but ultimately sabotaging our long-term potential for progress.
It's a classic case of short-term thinking versus long-term vision, and it highlights the need to find solutions that promote both economic competitiveness and global cooperation.
Okay, so we've peeled back a lot of layers on this trade war, from the economic struggles to the political shifts, the human cost, and even the impact on innovation. It seems like this conflict affects every part of our lives.
It really does, and it raises some profound questions about the path we're on as a global society.
We've given our listeners a lot to think about. But before we wrap things up, I have one more question for you. If you could wave a magic wand and make these trade tensions disappear, what advice would you give to the leaders of these three countries? What are the key ingredients for a lasting solution?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? If I had that magic wand, I'd start by reminding these leaders that they're not playing a game.
Okay.
Where one side has to lose for the other to win.
You mean it's not a zero-sum game?
Exactly. Their economies, they're so closely tied together that there's room for everyone to benefit. They need to ditch that us versus them mentality
Okay.
and really embrace collaboration.
Okay, I get that, cooperation sounds good, but how do they actually make that happen? What are the concrete steps?
Well, they have to address the root causes of these tensions. We've talked about trade imbalances, immigration, and the drug trade. These are complex issues. They require thoughtful solutions, not just slapping on tariffs as a quick fix.
So let's break it down, starting with trade imbalances. What's the solution there?
Well, instead of trying to reduce imports with tariffs, which ends up hurting everyone, why not focus on making American products more competitive globally?
Okay.
That means investing in innovation, research and development, and supporting industries where the U.S. has a natural advantage.
So play offense instead of just defense. I like that approach. What about immigration? That seems to be a particularly sensitive issue.
It is, and it's often used as a political football. But instead of using tariffs as a blunt instrument, it makes more sense to work together on comprehensive immigration reform. That means addressing why people are migrating in the first place,
Right.
creating legal pathways for those seeking opportunities, and ensuring border security in a humane and effective way.
And what about the drug trade, especially the fentanyl crisis? That's a serious problem with devastating consequences. How can cooperation help with that?
It requires a multi-pronged approach, sharing intelligence, coordinating law enforcement efforts, and tackling the demand side of the equation through public health initiatives and addiction treatment programs. It's about treating this as a shared problem that needs a collective response, not just pointing fingers and placing blame.
So taking a more holistic, long-term view and recognizing that these issues are all connected and require solutions that go beyond just trade policy.
Yeah, precisely. It's about understanding that in our interconnected world, we all share a common destiny. And cooperation, not conflict, is the key to a more prosperous and secure future for everyone.
That's a powerful message, especially in these times. But let's be realistic for a moment. Given the current political climate, with all the nationalist rhetoric and protectionist impulses, do you really think this kind of cooperation is possible?
That's the challenge, isn't it? It's easy to get caught up in the negativity and assume that conflict and division are inevitable. But I believe we have a choice.
Oh.
We can give in to fear and isolationism, or we can choose cooperation and find solutions that work for everyone.
So a call for optimism in a world that often feels pretty pessimistic. I like it. But what makes you so hopeful? What gives you faith that we can overcome these challenges and build a better future together?
My hope comes from the resilience of humanity, from our capacity for empathy, innovation, and problem solving. Throughout history, we've faced seemingly insurmountable challenges, and time and again, we found ways to overcome them, often through collaboration and a shared sense of purpose.
It's like we have this incredible ability to adapt, learn from our mistakes, and find new ways to work together.
Exactly. And I believe that this current moment, as difficult as it is also an opportunity, a chance to reevaluate what's important, question our assumptions, and create a more just, sustainable, and interconnected world.
So a wake-up call, a chance to make things better. It's an inspiring thought. And I think something we all need to remember as we navigate these uncertain times.
Absolutely. Because ultimately, our future depends on our ability to recognize our shared humanity, bridge divides, and find common ground.
Well said. We've explored a lot in this deep dive, from the specifics of tariffs to the larger implications for global trade and the future of our interconnected world. This trade war is clearly about much more than just economics. It reflects the challenges and opportunities we face as a global society.
It's a microcosm of the larger forces at play, and how we handle this situation will have ripple effects far beyond these three countries.
So to our listeners, we leave you with this: stay informed, engage in thoughtful discussions, and don't underestimate your power to shape the future. Because ultimately, it's up to all of us to decide what kind of world we want to live in.
A world of cooperation or conflict. A world that embraces our shared humanity or succumbs to division and fear. The choice is ours.
That's a powerful message to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.